Hi, welcome to this Blender video tutorial entitled TextObjects. One of Blender's many object types is a special curve object called text. To demonstrate TextObjects, I have a blank Blender scene displayed in top orthographic view. I'll press Shift-A and add a text object to the scene. By default, Blender adds a text object to the scene comprised of the letters TEXT. This text object is flat, and it has no z dimension, and is by default dimensional along the XY plane. I will tab into Edit mode. Note that instead of accessing any sub-object level components, a cursor bar appears at the end of the text. Editing the text is much like editing text in a word processor. I can backspace over the existing text and type in new text. The right and left arrow keys control the position of the cursor. I'll place the cursor between the N and the E, and I'll add a T. Holding down the Shift key and pressing the arrow keys allows the letters to be selected. Here I will select the E and the Z and replace them with an I and an S. I will click on the Object Data icon in the Properties Editor, which displays the text object controls. In the Font Name box, I will change the name of this text object from the default text to Richard III. I will scroll down to the Font panel. By default, Blender uses an internal built-in font called bfont. A different font can be used by clicking on the folder icon to the right of the font name. This displays Blender's file browser. Locate a different font on your computer. On my Mac, the fonts are located in the Library Font directory. Blender can incorporate most any PostScript Type 1 or TrueType fonts. Here I will select Plaginet Cherokee and click on the Open button. The text now changes to the newly selected font. The text can be changed back to the default font, or any other font installed in the Blender scene, by clicking on the Browse ID Data drop-down box to the left of the font name. The font size of the text can be adjusted by changing the size controller. Here I will make it 1.5. The italic angle of the text can be adjusted by changing the shear controller. Here I will make it 0.2. By default, Blender text will not word wrap. This is because the default text box, in which the text is placed, has no preset dimensions. I'll scroll down to the text box panel and increase the text box width by making it larger than 0. Note that as I increase this width control, a line appears above the text corresponding to the width control in Blender units. I'll set the text box width dimension to 15 Blender units. The text phrase cannot fit within the width setting, so the last word, discontent, is word wrapped to a second line. With a defined text box width, a text can be aligned using the controls located in the Paragraph panel. By default, the text is aligned left. Here it is aligned right. And here it is aligned center. Justify extends the spacing of the words to fill the text box width. And Flush extends the spacing of the letters and spaces to fill the width of the text box. I'll go back to left alignment. The character spacing can be adjusted by the character spacing controller. The word spacing can be adjusted by the word spacing controller. And the line spacing can be controlled by the line spacing controller. The text can be offset along either the x-axis or the y-axis. I will click on the View button located in the 3D Editor viewport header and select Tool Shelf. Pressing the T key while in edit mode on a text object would simply add a T to the text line. The copy, cut, and paste tools located in the tool panel do not interact with the computer's clipboard. These functions are internal to the Blender scene. Nor do these functions interact with the Blender text editor, which does have access to your computer's clipboard. It is possible to paste text from an external text file by clicking on the Text button in the 3D Editor viewport header and selecting Paste File. This displays Blender's file browser. Here I will select the richard.txt file located on my desktop and click Paste File. The contents of the file are now part of the text object. I'll place my text cursor before the M and press Enter, forcing the carriage return. The 2 uppercase and 2 lowercase buttons will force the entire text to either upper or lowercase characters. The bold and italic buttons will change the selected text to either bold or italic. However, the associated bold or italic font styles, if the font has any, must first be added. The Underline button will underline selected text. Here I will select Glorious by holding down my Shift key and using my arrow buttons. I'll then click on the Underline button. The thickness and position of the underline can be adjusted by the thickness and position controls located in the font panel. We can add dimension to the text object by adjusting the Extrude controller located in the Geometry panel. I will set the extrusion for 0.1, and I'll rotate my view. The text is now extruded. I'll zoom in on the word winter. We can bevel the edges of the text by adjusting the bevel controller. I'll set the bevel control to 0.03. The text is now beveled. I'll click on the View button in the 3D header and go to Top View. Here I will select the text that I added from the text file and delete it by pressing the Delete key on my Mac or Backspace key on a PC. I'll then set the width of the text box to 0 so that the entire text is on one line. Since Blender text objects are a form of a curve object, they are very flexible. There are a number of ways to bend text objects. I'll tab out of Edit mode and snap my cursor to the text object. I'll then add a Bezier curve. I'll name this object Text Curve. I'll scale the curve up a bit and then tab into Edit mode. With the handle selected, I'll subdivide it. I'll then tab out of Edit mode. I'll select the text object and click on the Text on Curve box located in the font panel. I'll select the Text Curve object as the curve object. The text now conforms to the curve. I'll select the curve object and tab into Edit mode. I can now adjust the shape of the curve and thus the shape of the text. I'll tab out of Edit mode and delete the curve object. I will then add a Bezier circle object and name it Text Circle. I'll then scale the Bezier circle up a bit. I'll then select the text object and in the Text on Curve box, select the Text Circle object. The text now follows the curve of the circle. I'll scale the circle down a bit and rotate my view. Note that the bending of the text object using the Text on Curve box only bends the text along the XY plane. I'll delete the curve object. Text objects can make use of some of Blender's modifiers as well. With the text object selected, I'll click on the modifier icon in the Properties panel and add a modifier. Many of Blender's modifiers are available for use on the text object. I'll select the Simple Deform modifier. I'll switch the mode to Bend and adjust the factor setting. This is another way to make the text bend into a circle along the XY plane. I will remove the modifier. To bend the text around the XZ or YZ plane, we need to add a curve modifier. First, I will add a Bezier circle to the scene. I will name this object Text Circle 2. I'll then rotate it 90 degrees around the x-axis. I'll select the text object and add a curve modifier. In the object box, I'll select the Text Circle 2 object. The text is now curved around the XZ plane, following the shape of the Bezier circle object. I can also bend it flat around the XZ plane by changing the deformation from X to -X. I'll go back to the X deformation. Like all Blender curve objects, the text object can be converted into a mesh object. The density of the mesh is determined by the text resolution setting located in the Shape panel. By default, this is set to 12, which is quite high. I'll set the resolution down to 6. Then, with the text object selected, I'll press Alt-C and select Mesh from Curve. The text object is now a mesh object. I'll tab into Edit mode. I now have access to all of the vertices, edges, and faces that comprise the mesh structure.